Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
They're still not sure it is a baby.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, my weird dad's weird podcast about weird movies.
Hello, listeners. This is Mark, and this is the season finale of Wake Up Heavy, Recollections of Horror. And today I am going to be talking about my all-time favorite movie of all time in the history of the world, numero uno, Desert Island Disc, the toppermost of the poppermost, David Lynch's 1977 seminal masterpiece, Eraserhead.
Part 1.
Now, you may be wondering, is Eraserhead a horror movie? Well, I consider it a horror movie. It's often labeled as a horror movie, and like so many of David Lynch's movies, it is uncategorizable. Is that a word? I think that's a word. All I know is that when I was growing up, going to the video store, Eraserhead was in the horror movie section, and that is good enough for me. As I am wont to do on these major episodes of the podcast, I want to kind of dive into my history with Eraserhead. It's a little bit more difficult than some of the other movies. This is not a movie that I fell in love with instantly, like Phantasm or Tourist Trap. It's actually something that I didn't even get through the first time I watched it. But I want to go even further back than that. I was something of a de facto David Lynch fan without even realizing it. I was obsessed with the Elephant Man in elementary school, and I really don't remember, and will probably repeat that phrase numerous times during this. I don't really remember why or when that happened, if it was because of Lynch's 1980 movie, The Elephant Man, or if it was before. I want to say my obsession came before the movie was released, because I don't really think I would have gone to see it otherwise. And it may just have been that on a trip to the public library, they had a book out on display, and I found it intriguing, and I read it. I know that I had, I think, 2 different biographies of the Elephant Man when I was growing up, and one of them was the biography written by Frederick Treves, the character played by Anthony Hopkins in the movie. Now, my memories of going to see Elephant Man are very clear. It was myself and a childhood friend of mine named Scott. I don't remember what the occasion was. It may just have been that I dragged him along. He was the only one that would go see it with me. And it may have even been a birthday where it was just him and me going. I did that sometimes. I wouldn't have big birthday parties. I'd have to look at the release, which I probably should have done before I started talking about it. Elephant Man was released in October of 1980. That is not around my birthday, so we just went to go see it, I guess. All I know is that I was 11 years old, and the movie struck a major chord with me. I was fascinated by the story. I do remember tearing up quite a bit during the movie, and this is not something that young 11-year-old boys maybe are all that comfortable doing with each other. But I know that I kind of felt his hesitancy with the movie, and I think I touched on that in an earlier episode about watching movies with other people and taking on their experience with your own. But I loved it. I loved the movie, and I remember watching the Oscars that year or for that year and really rooting for Elephant Man and David Lynch. And I know I was disappointed that it didn't win Best Picture and David Lynch didn't win Best Director. And of course, another black and white masterpiece was up for a lot of the same awards that year. Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull and Elephant Man were tied with 8 nominations each. I don't know if they were all in the same categories. Raging Bull won a couple, Robert De Niro won, and then they got something for editing or sound editing. And years later, I would be very disappointed when I kind of got more into Scorsese that they both lost out to Ordinary People for Best Picture. And Ordinary People is a fine movie. Raging Bull and Eraserhead are more my taste. And fun fact, other than both being black and white, both movies contain a line from their main character in the essence of, "I am not an animal."
I am not an animal! I'm not an animal.
And one last thing about Elephant Man, I remember whenever it was that I found out that it was John Hurt who played John Merrick in that movie, I was absolutely gobsmacked that it was the same guy who had the alien burst out of his chest in Alien. I could not comprehend it. Because this was only his second film, there was a lot of discussion about Eraserhead upon Elephant Man's release. And so I think that was probably, other than maybe seeing ads in the newspaper for it for midnight showings here in town, that's probably the first real time that it wormed its way into my brain. And I was always intrigued by the title, Eraserhead. What in the world could that possibly mean? Now, of course, years later when I would see the cover of the VHS box, I just naturally assumed that it was because of Henry's hairstyle. Now, the next experience I had with David Lynch was with his third movie, Dune. And that came out in 1984, so I was 15, and I was really excited about this movie. It looked like nothing I had ever seen before. And of course, by this age, I'd seen Blade Runner, all the Star Wars movies had been out, and other than cheesy 50s campy sci-fi, that was about the extent of my experience with science fiction movies. I had probably seen Alien as well. Dune was quite an experience. I would never seen ships like that, never seen creatures like that, and it was just such a broad, epic story that I instantly liked it, and I still have somewhere the picture book that came out with it. Now, there was a number of promotional materials made for Dune. There was a line of action figures, if you can believe it, made by the company LJN, and from what I understand, it was a colossal flop. Much like the movie itself, it bombed, it got trashed by the critics, and I don't think I was aware of too much of that at the time because I loved it. I still love that movie. I think it created a world just way more interesting to me than Star Wars or even Blade Runner, which is a movie that I really enjoy. I think I really like the fact that it took place so far in the future that it was all believable. And then it had all this religious stuff and, the worms, and it was just a really interesting tale. When I look back at it now, I see a lot of the faults. A lot of the special effects aren't very good. Some of the acting is a bit overwrought. The voiceover, or it's not voiceover, it's inner thoughts that come out. It's used so extensively, I can kind of see where that bothered people. I just soaked it all in as a 15-year-old. and dug it. I bought the book shortly after the movie came out and tried to read it. It's really dense. I eventually got through it, I think, either at the end of high school or start of college when I could kind of handle it a little bit better. I thought that Lynch did a fine job. There's most of the stuff from the book is in there. He created some interesting things that weren't in the book. Of course, a lot of stuff was left out. I didn't really get the indication that he had just totally blown it. Now, fans of the book probably see it differently, but I came the other way around. And of course, again, this being Lynch's third movie and this being a troubled production and a movie that had changed hands numerous times over the years, Eraserhead came back up in the conversation. Now, at this point, I was familiar with that movie, but still hadn't seen it.
I think it's time for a break.
Now, here's where my memory gets a little fuzzy. I think for a long time, I thought that I watched Eraserhead sometime pretty shortly after Dune came out. I was older. I know we were seeing it all the time at the video store. It was right next to Escape from New York, which we rented a lot. And I looked at that cover just about every time we went in. And I read the back. Was really intrigued by all the black and white pictures. The box was striking. I actually think that it was a few more years still until my sister and I tried to watch it for the first time. And this is probably when Blue Velvet came out. And then the talk really went back to Eraserhead because this was Lynch's first personal film since Eraserhead, and Blue Velvet came out in 1986, in the summer of 1986, and I was 17 at the time, and I was working a summer job for family friends of ours at a wicker furniture making factory here in town, and there was a guy there, I think he was the warehouse manager, and he was kind of different from most of the other working class guys that worked there. He lived in the artsy part of town, the Tower District, and it's named that because the Tower Theater is there, and that is where midnight movies were shown in town. And while I was growing up, as I mentioned before, I did see, or I recollect seeing ads for their midnight showings, and I don't know how often they did it in the early 80s, but Eraserhead played the midnight circuit for a lot of years across the country, and from my memory, it played here weekly or maybe monthly on a Friday or Saturday night. I think this guy mentioned that, and it piqued my interest, and we had a little discussion about Eraserhead, and I do remember him saying that David Lynch had directed both Eraserhead and Pink Flamingos, and it didn't sound right to me at the time, and I wasn't really knee-deep into cult films and things like that yet, so I took him at his word until I realized later on that that was a John Waters film. This all kind of came together with the release of Blue Velvet. My sister went and saw Blue Velvet with a friend of hers. Now, I was old enough to go see it by that time, but I didn't, and I'm not really sure why. But she had not a negative response, but I know that she thought it was really weird, and, it's pretty violent and sexual and all that stuff. So I think it may have offended her sensibilities a little bit. But at some point that summer, when my parents went out of town, we decided to finally take the plunge with Eraserhead. So our basic routine for when my parents would go out of town would be to go to our favorite video store in Sunnyside and rent videos and get either fast food or takeout from Javier's Mexican restaurant. And for some reason, remember that we did Javier's this time. I don't know why that's so clear, and I have no idea what else we rented, but very good chance that we rented something like The Thing or Escape from New York or Blade Runner. But we'd rent a couple movies, go home and watch them and eat our takeout and stuff. And so we plugged in Eraserhead, and even though we both knew it was going to be a weird movie, we were not prepared for what was happening on the screen. And so that first viewing, I think we both looked at each other at about the halfway point and were like, that's it, I'm done, and turned it off. Now, I kind of often wonder what would have happened if I had tried to watch that maybe during the day on my own, if I would have made it all the way through or not. I don't know. I can't really say. I might have made it through. I probably would have still had the same strong feelings. And those feelings were mainly confusion and disorientation. There was zero context for me for what was happening on the screen in Eraserhead. I had no clue how to compare it to something else, what it reminded me of. I had never seen anything like it before. And that was unsettling. And I think that's the main takeaway from that first attempt, is that we were unsettled and disquieted by the movie. Now, we were home alone and it was dark out, but it wasn't I'm scared because I just saw the creepy twin girls in The Shining kind of freaked out. It was just like, I have no idea what's going on. And I think the point we made it to is the first appearance of the lady in the radiator with the poofy cheeks and the stuff falling out of the sky. No clue as to what is going on in this thing. And shut it off, took it back whenever movies were due back at that point with that video store. And then at some point, I revisited the film.
It's time for another tangent.
Now, I'm not one to shut movies off or walk out of movies. It very rarely ever happens. I think I almost walked out of Under the Cherry Moon. That was so fucking atrocious. These days, I turn streaming movies off if the quality is real shitty, like a lot of the exploitation movies that show up on Amazon Prime are in, their video rips, and I just, if the movie isn't entertaining, then I just stop. I don't think I've ever really walked out of a theater. And even videos back then, I think, you paid for it. Who knows what's going to happen in the last 30 minutes or so. So this was unusual to stop a movie dead cold halfway through and say, I can't do anymore. Can't do it. I don't know what's going on. But something stuck in the back of my head and made me need to see it again. And when I did revisit it, I watched it all the way through, really, really liked it. Still didn't understand it, but really liked it. I'm not sure if it was before or after I first tried to watch Blue Velvet, which probably would have been the next summer or so. This again was back in the days when movies took about a year to come out on video after their theatrical release. And so I would have been 18. I had kind of the same experience with Blue Velvet. I made it about halfway through, stopped it, and didn't watch it again for a while. Now, it was a little bit different because this I sort of remember more distinctly. It was a hot summer day. I was watching it in the afternoon, laying on the couch, and it's a little bit slow moving. And I think I fell asleep, not because I was bored. It was just a hot summer day, and who knows what I had been doing the night before. Probably been out late. And I just didn't get to it during that rental. I didn't finish it. But at some point, again, I rewatched it, enjoyed it so much more, became one of my favorite films. They became regular rentals at that point, the both of them, for as long as we lived near that video store.
Part 2.
Okay, let's talk about London. I went on the London semester. That was a program offered by the Arts and Humanities Department of the California State University at Fresno, my alma mater. And this is something they did every year during the spring semester. I have no idea if they still do it. I'd like to think that they do. Basically, that department and any students that signed up went and lived in London and studied in London for a semester. Kind of a truncated semester. It was a little bit shorter than the normal semester back home. And the focus was, of course, on theater, British lit, British history. We did a lot of touring of the country and of London itself, went to a lot of the museums. And I really didn't know what to expect. I think me and my friend Andy, who had been a friend since high school, we were roomies with a couple other guys. I think we were expecting to drink because the drinking age was lower in the UK, and go to concerts. And other than that, really had no idea. I was going to hit the bookstores I knew and just see what happened. When we drove in on the bus, I noticed a theater, or rather a cinema, as they're referred to over there, because theaters, of course, are where plays are put on. And on the marquee was Drugstore Cowboy and Jim Jarmusch's Mystery Train. And these are two movies that I had really wanted to see and knew I would have virtually no chance to see in Fresno. Some art house movies came, but it was rare. That would change in a couple of years, but at the time, I really had no hope to see those movies in the theater. And then, once we settled in and discovered Time Out magazine, I realized that there were tons of repertory cinemas in London that showed old movies. And I was in heaven, and this is what I did in London. I went to a couple of concerts. Of course, I went to the pubs, but my entertainment really was museums, bookstores, and repertory cinemas.
Nerd alert.
And I think if I could probably look this up. I still have all my stuff from London semester, but we were there for 15 weeks, and I saw 32 movies at the cinema. For me, that seemed like a lot. And it still does now, and I know some people watch, I watch way more than that because of streaming, but we were going to school, there was tons of other stuff to do. A lot of people thought it was strange that was what I was spending my time doing, but I was in absolute movie heaven. I saw Taxi Driver there, I saw Paris, Texas there, I saw Easy Rider there, I saw a bunch of Russ Meyer movies there, and I saw 4 David Lynch films there, all in one night at the Scala Cinema.
I think it's time for a break. The Scala Cinema ended up being my go-to place, and it was a real interesting theater.
And actually, a lot of the theaters were set up this way where the seats were up really high and kind of like how we do stadium seating now in big theaters. And the screen was down low, so there was never anybody sitting in your way. I loved that. And of course, I loved the programming. And I actually have a bunch of my programs still from the Scala, the Phoenix, the Electric Cinema, and Riverside Studio Cinema. Eraserhead was kind of floating around, and I think I missed it a couple of times just by having other things to do. But at the Scala on February 10th of 1990, they did a David Lynch marathon, and it included 2 short films that I had only read about previously, The Alphabet and the Grandmother, and then Eraserhead and Blue Velvet. So I went. The first time I went, I realized you had to have a membership, which I gladly paid for. I think it was like 50p or something. So at the time, that was around $1. With that card, you could go and see any movies you wanted. And so I went that evening. Pretty sure I went by myself. And this is where I learned that I loved going to movies by myself, because I don't think I hardly ever did that before. And sat through about 4 hours of David Lynch material back to back and loved it all. So the point of this is that prior to that, I'd only seen the VHS version of the movie. Now, Eraserhead is a very dark film, very stark black and white, but it was compounded by the transfer to video and watching it on old 4x3 standard tube TVs, and I don't think our TV was even a 25-inch set. And it was super dark, super grainy, and of course, with VHS, it degrades over time with viewings, with rewindings, with pause, all kinds of stuff can happen to those old tapes. So there was a lot of stuff that I never even really understood what was happening in the frame. And that was about 80% illuminated for me when I finally got to see it on the big screen in London. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the DVD edition that David Lynch released back about 16 years ago now. The other thing that this accomplished was that I thought I had finally caught up and seen every David Lynch film on the big screen. Really didn't think I'd have any chance to see either of these 2 movies on the big screen, and so I was all caught up. And I didn't realize that he had a number of other short films available until that DVD came out around the same time as the Eraserhead DVD. But those were really the only 2 that I had read about, The Alphabet and the Grandmother. So I was like, I've seen all his films now on the big screen. I am a bona fide David Lynch fan. Now, at this time, Twin Peaks was on the horizon, and it would premiere, I think, in April of that year. And so that was all over. That was in all the magazines. I remember buying an issue of Rolling Stone while I was there, actually, that had an interview with David Lynch, and it discussed the show, and it also discussed Wild at Heart, which was going to be coming out shortly thereafter. So it was Lynch on the brain while I was in London. I almost bought their VHS version of Eraserhead, even though I knew that it wouldn't work at home because of the different systems. The different systems that we have. But it was a very different cover than the old black and white with red border cover that I was used to. I think it was kind of an electric green. I ended up catching a little bit, and this might have actually been before I went to go see the festival, the David Lynch Festival. It was playing on TV, and that kind of blew my mind too. And I'm sure that the Eraserhead played on cable and probably played on local, like New York and LA stations, over the years in the 80s. I had never experienced it on just regular TV. And I think even that version was better than what I was used to. It kind of unlocked some confusing things that, made the movie even more surreal than it already was, and kind of clarified a few different scenes and points of the movie that I just never fully understood before.
Part 3.
Okay, we're getting close to a half an hour in here, and I haven't even talked about the movie yet. This is kind of like those movies where you're watching and you get about 15, 30 minutes in, and then all of a sudden the title card finally comes up. I remember being surprised or noticing that for the first time with Raising Arizona. I think they're about 10 minutes into the movie, and then the title pops up, and I was like, wait, oh, that hadn't happened yet. And then, of course, recently with Mandy, I think that title card doesn't pop up until like an hour into the movie. So anyway, I will use David Lynch's own words as the synopsis for Eraserhead. It is a dream of dark and troubling things. The plot itself is very simple. It is about Henry Spencer, a nebbish, nerdish man who works at a printing factory. He has a girlfriend who he has gotten pregnant. She has a baby. They get married. He takes flights of fancy to escape the dread of his home life and in the industrial wasteland in which he lives. It took David Lynch 5 years to complete Eraserhead, and I remember reading about the movie after I saw it, and it kind of latched on. I searched out reading material on it, and of course Danny Peary's Cult Movies series. In the first book, he discusses Eraserhead, and I read that. And then I got, at one point, a really great book called Midnight Movies by Stuart Samuels. And it discussed, I think there's about 8 films, including Night of the Living Dead, Jodorowsky's El Topo, John Waters' Pink Flamingos, Rocky Horror Picture Show, and a couple others. And it's a pretty good overall deep dive into Eraserhead, the making of, behind the scenes, even a little bit. And that is something that I read over and over and over again, and I would kind of catch something new every time, just like what happens when you watch the movie. So I would read that point about it taking so long to make, and I just always kind of thought that it meant it took that long for it to come out. Like the movie was made, but they had problems getting it released. But no, it took 5 years to make. He started it when he went to the AFI in LA, and I won't get too deep into all that, just for the sake of what brevity I can spare for this. But it was basically started as kind of a student film. It wasn't supposed to be a feature-length film. They didn't do those. They tried to do one, and it ended up being a disaster, and so they were very against feature-length movies. The script that Lynch presented was 20-something odd pages long, and so in movie land, page length usually related to movie length, so it was kind of a 1-for-1 ratio, and they assumed it was going to be a 20-something odd minute movie, and he said, well, no, it'll be a little bit longer. Oh, okay, a 40-something odd minute movie. Well, it ended up being, at the end, 150 minutes, which later got trimmed down, and I will discuss the trimming down of that after the interview portion of the show. But yeah, it was stop and start. It was running out of money. They had, the initial grant from the AFI, and then had to supplement that with other money. And so Lynch famously had a Wall Street Journal newspaper route to pay for it. He slept in one of the room, or in Henry's room, basically, during the making of the movie for a while. Just struggled to get it made. There is a famous scenario here where Henry is walking down the hall. He opens the door. There's a cut, and when he enters, it's 2 years later or something. So it was shot piecemeal. After about the first year, the next 4 years were very spotty. And of course, I misspoke. It wasn't 150 minutes long. It was an hour and 50 minutes long, and then trimmed down to 90 minutes or 89, as the IMDb has it. And once the shooting was done, they got the sound and everything done really quickly to get it into competition at FilmX, an LA film festival, and I think it premiered in March of 1977. The rest is history, and we'll get into a little bit of that later on. I think for right now, it would be a good time to play the first interview for Wake Up Heavy. Hopefully, you have seen the movie. If you have not and have access to it, I would suggest watching it now. We do get a little spoilery, and I will spoil the movie, of course, after the interview when I get a little bit more in depth into the surreal aspects of the film, the missing pieces, and all that other fun stuff. But, if you're like me, I don't necessarily have to see a movie. I don't mind having things spoiled for me. A lot of times when that happens, and it happens a lot, I don't usually enjoy something less. I kind of take it as a challenge to see how the puzzle is going to fit together. And so sometimes if there's like a twist ending and I know it, I'm working on how they're going to get there. How do they achieve this? And if they do it well, I can still be like, oh, that was awesome. I didn't know about the twist for The Sixth Sense, but knowing it now, it doesn't ruin the movie for me on rewatch. So anyway, watch it or just keep listening, whichever. It's up to you. How the hell would I know?
Part 4.
So without further ado, this is Mike White from the Projection Booth podcast, my favorite podcast. We are going to be talking about Eraserhead.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
When did you first become aware that there was a movie out there called Eraserhead?
I think the same time I became aware of it was the same night that we rented it from Blockbuster. It was a couple friends of mine and we saw this cover, and with that amazing picture of Jack Nance with his hair all stood up on end, and we had no idea what it was. Took it home, and we watched it down in my mom's basement, had the lights off, and proceeded to get completely freaked out for the next 90 minutes. And wow, it was the first time that my friend Leon told me, I'm actually a little sketched out to walk home after this. I was like, wow, okay, yeah, that movie definitely left an impression. Now, we laughed at a lot of it. We talked over a lot of it, but man, oh man, were we captivated.
About how old were you guys when you first watched it?
Probably like 17, 16, something like that.
When did it become one of your favorite movies?
Oh, it was pretty much that first night. And then after that, I watched it a few more times and then would kind of put it away for a little bit and then would watch other things from Lynch. I think I'd actually seen Elephant Man first. I know I tried to watch Dune on TV, and it was one of these, like, it just took all day with commercials for them to show it, and it was probably the TV version of it. Wasn't a big fan the first time I saw Dune, but eventually I warmed up to it after I saw Twin Peaks. And then I think right around the time I saw Eraserhead was also the time that Blue Velvet was coming out on VHS. But once Twin Peaks hit, then I became a huge fan of Lynch's and would revisit this film more often to see where some of those ideas came from. And then this was a movie that I would always recommend when I was working at Blockbuster Video and saying, people would ask me for horror films, and I would recommend Eraserhead and Repulsion, and not a lot of people were very happy with me and my recommendations.
Actually, that's one of the reasons why I decided to ask if you would be on the show. I saw your suggestion on Twitter during Halloween time, and then I just happened to kind of pick through a couple different episodes of your podcast. The one that I remember was the episode on The Beyond, and you mentioned that same kind of scenario there about making that suggestion to people. And then I think there were 2 other episodes, and I don't remember which ones because I skip around. And I thought, okay, those are 2 of my all-time favorite movies. Eraserhead's coming up. I got to ask him if he'll do this. So now, have you ever seen Eraserhead on the big screen?
I have not. I would love to, but I've never had that opportunity.
I got the chance to see it in London, actually, in 1990, and that was right around the time that Twin Peaks was coming out here back in the States. Have you seen the UK cut of Twin Peaks?
I remember they put that out on VHS. So the one with the end, the quote-unquote ending of it?
Right.
Yeah.
And it ended how?
It ended... So, after... I want to say that the pilot ends right around the time that Mrs. Palmer is freaking out. And there's like the ceiling fan, and then it kind of goes into some of the images that we see in Cooper's dream from the third episode. Mm-hmm. So there's stuff about Mike and stuff about Bob, and I mean, it doesn't really give you much of a resolution, but we see a lot of those images from, especially when it's like that whole, I'll catch you with my death bag. Mm-hmm. They say I'll kill again. So basically you kind of, quote unquote, know that Bob is the killer, but we have no idea how he relates to the story, really.
And I don't know if it's on the new Fire Walk With Me box set.
I don't think it is, but I know that for a while it was the only version that was available when you would buy the pilot, I want to say, when you would buy that on VHS. And then when you bought the pilot on like Hong Kong DVD, it was on there as well, I believe.
I kind of lost my taste for Twin Peaks when Fire Walk With Me came out.
Oh, so, man. Yeah. I'm quite the opposite on that one.
Now, have you seen any of the cut scenes from Eraserhead?
I have heard a lot about them, but I've never seen them. I've seen some still images, the same things that you've probably seen, especially that's on the absurd... What is this company's name? I can't remember, but the DVD that they put out back in, it says Eraserhead 2000, but I think it came out in 2002.
Yes.
So there's like, for the menu, there's Henry with the dead cat, and then there's a documentary on there called Eraserhead Stories, and they have some images of like the log lady, Mary Colson, being tied up, and another woman tied up on a bed, and it's got Henry Jack Nance there with these battery cables, but I don't think he was the one who was supposed to be using the battery cables on them. And then Lynch talks a lot about other scenes that were in there. He talks about it on that, and then there was a interview that was done with him in 79 where he also talks about other deleted scenes. And I know even Catherine Coulson talks about how she was the nurse that is supposed to give the baby to Henry and Mary, but you never see that scene. So there's that kind of always that weird moment when we hear about the baby and then we see Henry come home to the baby, but we never actually see how long it's been between those two scenes.
I think if I remember correctly, the nurse scene was one that was never actually filmed. I always thought it was kind of strange that she would play two characters in the movie. And the last time I listened to or watched that extra on the DVD, they explain, I think he says that that's the one that they never shot. And then the other missing scenes, he has a part of one of them, and I don't know why they didn't include it on this. And I don't think it's on the Criterion release either. But I would really love to see some of those scenes. Yet I think that it's probably best that they weren't in the movie. Have you seen the Blue Velvet release with the scenes with Megan Mullally and the dinners that they have and things like that?
Yeah, there's so much more to that, which is kind of crazy. That, and then that lime green box set that has like an hour more footage from Wild at Heart. It's just, there's such a rich vein of unseen Lynch stuff. I mean, even with that Fire Walk With Me disc that had finally the missing pieces that were not necessarily put back in, but as a separate thing. I respect that Lynch doesn't go back and recut his films and try to put them all together. He leaves that up to the fans if they want to do that, or if they can do that, because sometimes stuff just doesn't add up necessarily, but I'm glad that he's starting to release some of that stuff.
Yeah, he had a long history of saying, once a movie is done, that's it, and I'm not going to go back and change it even if I had to change it originally because of outside pressure, I'm not going to go and make a director's cut. It's organic. It came out the way it did, and that's it. And I think when I saw the Blue Velvet stuff, I kind of thought, it's interesting, but a lot of this I could see really making this story drag a lot more. And some of it was kind of that weird for weird's sake, like I think it's dogs on the stage at the bar where Dorothy Vellon sings.
Yeah, the slow lounge.
Yeah, and I thought, that's fun and it's very Lynchian, but I don't miss that it's not in the version that I normally watch. I would be curious to see the stuff that got cut from Wild at Heart, though, because I know he had trouble with a lot of the violence in that one.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's in the script. So I actually started to do a little bit of a fan edit where I was taking the script and trying to line that up with what was originally released and then with the extras. But of course, some of the transitions don't necessarily work as well. And then it was just such a arduous process that I kind of put it aside for a little while, hoping that someone else would do it. And I have yet to see if someone else has done that fan edit. But if they don't do it, one of these days when I'm not editing, 15 podcasts at a time, maybe I'll go back and do that.
Now, have you seen the script or the outline for Eraserhead?
I have not, only what they showed in the documentary stuff. So just that, I think there was one line of, it starts on a planet, and that's about it.
I would be really curious, though, to see the whole thing, and especially since finding out that the lady in the radiator was an addition. And once I found that out, I thought, well, how did we get from this scene to the namesake of the movie, because she seems integral to that.
That whole section of Henry, quote unquote, on trial and the baby head coming out and taking us into that whole other section where we meet Paul and we get the Eraserhead part of it. I mean, you could easily take that out, but I love that section. And that's the same with so many of the things in the movie, is that they're almost like these little discrete chunks and you could easily remove them, but it's such a great section, and I love the way that it fits together with the rest of it, and that we go from nightmarish to, I guess, surreal, but also very funny moments. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've always appreciated about Lynch, is that you can have that absurd humor and the nightmarish qualities all working together, and within a few minutes you can be laughing, and then you can be scared to death, you might be crying. He really knows how to toy with at least my emotions.
And I think that that's interesting about that scene being pulled out, because it's one of the few scenes that's left in the movie that has other people in it beside Henry and Mary and the baby. And it seems like that's a lot of what got cut, were the scenes with extraneous characters. I've heard of the landlady, and of course she's in the credits, and the scene where he goes down and is kicking the furniture, I guess. Again, when you read about it and it's intriguing, but you kind of think, well, this world is so isolated that anytime you step out of that, it kind of pulls you out a little bit from the movie. Now, when you refer Eraserhead and Repulsion to people to watch, is there any reason it's the combination of those two?
No, those were just the two videos that I knew that we had in the store. Okay. And both of those films, they share qualities to me. Right. I don't know if it's just the black and white cinematography, it's the isolation. I mean, both of those films, so much of them take place in a single room, in a single apartment. And it's kind of like, it's that old line of like, hell is other people. It's like they would be fine if they were just left alone, or maybe they just shouldn't be left alone because they're both kind of going mad in a single place. And they're both so nightmarish. I mean, I always picture the hands coming out of the walls going after Deneuve, or just Henry there with the worm and watching the worm and the way that we go into the worm's mouth. I mean, there's just so many fascinating things going on with both of these movies. But yeah, I guess they just both struck a chord and both feel like horror films that aren't necessarily the typical run-of-the-mill stuff. I mean, there's no one wearing a mask chasing around a beautiful woman with a knife, but to me, they're as nightmarish as anything that we would see in that type of genre.
Yeah, and I guess it was kind of a loaded question because when I first saw Repulsion, I thought, man, Lynch must have seen this. And I think it was that quality of being alone and in a room, but there's some musical horror movie music, crashing on the organ. And I think in Eraserhead, it's when he turns to look at the baby and it's actually sick.
You are sick.
Yeah. And then it's
where it suddenly becomes sick, right, just like with one cut. It's so great.
That brings up another point that I was hoping to get to, actually. But I think there's a sting like that in Repulsion as well, and a couple of different times. And I know that Lynch wasn't a movie guy before he went to AFI, but they did show films there. So I just always was curious if that was one of the ones that they watched. There are definitely similarities. Even in the rabbit, the skinned rabbit and the baby have a similar kind of greasy look to them.
That's a good word for that.
That point about the baby being instantly sick. Do you have children?
I have like a faux granddaughter. And it's funny, we recently did an episode on Session 9, and the thing that drives our main character to murder his wife and child in that is a ear infection that the little girl has, and that whole helpless feeling of your child being sick and not being able to take care of it. And I really get that feeling when it comes to this, to Eraserhead. And I know that Jennifer Lynch had a lot of issues when she was growing up. I think she had clubbed feet, and they had to do all of these surgeries on her feet. So the whole thing of the baby having that, all the bindings around its body kind of keeping it in place, I always kind of saw as being like, similar to how Jennifer Lynch probably was when she was growing up.
That fear about a kid being sick, is just so universal in that just that instant in that scene, it just encapsulates that perfectly. And we deal with that all the time with our daughter. It just can turn on you on a dime like that.
Oh, and I love the way that the baby kind of plays with him, where he's about to leave the room and go down and check his mail, and then the baby starts to cry, and then he'll stop, and then he'll go back to do it again. The baby will start to cry, and just that, and then when the baby outright laughs at him, it's just like, wow, okay, yeah, you're definitely being manipulated by this thing here.
Yeah, and I think that's how all parents feel at some point, unfortunately, and he expresses that kind of the thing that we keep deep down and don't try to lay onto our kids that, you're a burden and I'd rather be out getting worms in the mail and...
The Worm of the Month Club, I think he must belong to. Yeah.
That's something that I always kind of gravitated toward because I'm obsessed with getting mail. And when I saw that, is one thing that I've always felt very akin to with Henry. It wasn't worms, but I'm sorry, I don't know what has caught in my throat.
No worries. It might be a worm. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of autobiographical stuff in here. And I know that things like Philadelphia, and just the word Philadelphia is so loaded for him. And I know that this takes place in a place that we don't know, and that it was shot mostly in California, these kind of things. But it really has that feel of Philadelphia, the industrial parts, the parts where he was going to school in Philly. And to the point where, going back to Twin Peaks, I mean, the word Philadelphia is almost like a jump scare when Wyndham Earle is like, "What about Philadelphia?" when he screams it at Agent Cooper, and it's just like, whoa, becomes this whole thing of like the stuff that happened in Philadelphia to Agent Cooper, who was also kind of a stand-in for David Lynch too. So yeah, he has a lot of deep-seated feelings about that city. And I see a lot of that coming through, especially when Henry is out walking around the streets kind of aimlessly as he's on his however long vacation, which sure seems like he's out of work, which I'm sure is how Lynch was. I mean, Lynch also worked at a printing place. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always assumed the first few times that I watched it that it had actually been filmed in Philadelphia, and was surprised that it had been filmed in LA.
Yeah, I loved seeing the behind-the-scenes shots of him actually creating the stage where the lady in the radiator is at, and just to see how that all came together, and that it was shot outdoors but at night, and to hear all the stories of how everything in this movie was shot at night, and just that it lends, I mean, the outdoor stuff was shot usually either at night or on overcast days, and then that whole idea of them shooting these things almost clandestinely during the night just really kind of adds to the spookiness of it, and just where that dream logic really comes in.
And do you have, beyond the personal connections with Lynch, have you crafted your own interpretation of the movie?
I mean, it's pretty much what we've been talking about as far as the whole idea of, this guy being saddled with a wife that he doesn't necessarily want. It sounds like he and Mary have broken up, and that, obviously Mary's family is crazy in their own way, and that is very much like when you come over to your in-laws or, your potential in-laws and just see how nuts they are. It feels like that. It just feels like everything is amped up to the nth degree. Now, as far as the things like we were talking about with, Paul at the pencil factory and stuff, I'm not really sure exactly where that fits into this, but the overall narrative of the attractive lady across the hall and him wanting to be with her, and, is that his sexual fantasy of her? Is that something that's actually going on? Those kind of things. Is he having an affair, even though he's married to Mary? And I'm sure that Mary's name being Mary is very, very purposeful as well. There's just that she is marriage is basically what she represents, and got all those scenes of them sleeping together, and especially when he is pulling those things out of her and throwing them against the wall. Ugh.
Yeah, that took me a long time to realize that it appears that he's pulling them out of her. And I thought, oh my gosh, already having one baby, and now every time apparently you sleep together, she creates more of them. And what? So no thoughts, though, on what the worm could mean, or who the man on the planet is, or the lady in the radiator, or
the man in the planet. It feels almost like fate, just the way that he's pulling the levers and everything, and that he, is introducing. It feels very much like he's in a station house or something, and just the way that he's pulling those things. And I found it interesting too. I didn't even realize until maybe the last time or the time before that he only has one arm. So we are already going to the one-armed man, much like, again, with Twin Peaks. But the way that he is pulling those things, and just it seems like he's the one who's really controlling stuff. So Henry isn't even in control of his own fate. He's the one that takes the sperm type thing, to its destination, apparently to marry, So, yeah. There's just, so that's how I kind of see that guy. And I also find it interesting too, the way that he's got all those like marks all over his face, which is kind of also reminiscent of the baby when the baby gets sick. But I also like that in the background, in Henry's room, he doesn't have a lot of artwork, but one of the few things he has is this little portrait of an atom bomb going off. And it always reminds me of, it was so fitting, and I don't think people necessarily see this, but it was so fitting for him to be called on to do The Elephant Man, because when he talks about the tumors and the things from The Elephant Man, I remember him describing it as like a slow motion atomic explosion, and just the way that these things balloon out of the Elephant Man's face, and to see that also on the man in the planet as well, these marks on him, which are almost like little atomic explosions, or maybe he has those marks because of atomic radiation, and all of those things just get played through so much of Lynch's stuff. Some of the shots that we see in this movie, like a lamp going out, or when the woman across the hall comes out of the darkness into Henry's life. We'll see that again in so many things. I always think of Laura Dern coming out of the blackness in Blue Velvet. So it's such a nice Rosetta Stone almost of Lynchian stuff where we'll just see these things. I mean, God, electricity is so crucial to so many things in Twin Peaks. I mean, even Dale Cooper sticking a fork into a light socket in the one of the last episodes. Just like, yeah, electricity is key, and electricity is right there in this movie.
I always remember the light bulbs going out. That is repeated in Blue Velvet, I think, in Dorothy Vallon's apartment. And
yes.
And then, like you said, Laura Dern coming out of the shadows. And I never noticed that the Man on the Planet had just one arm. So now I'm going to have to go back and watch it again tomorrow to check that out.
I mean, I hope I'm not talking out of my ass, but when I was watching it last night, I was like, he's just using that left arm to pull those things, and he never uses both when he's doing it.
And I don't know if there's a good view of him when he suddenly pops up on the stage at all. I think it's just maybe a bust shot, head and shoulders, but I'll have to take a look at that and see. I don't know if you had the same experience, but on the VHS that I watched, so many years ago, it was so dark that a lot of that stuff I had no idea what it even was. But when you watch the Blu-ray or the DVD that he released, it's not even close to the same kind of quality. It's so much clearer.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then I don't know if you ever use DVDbeaver.com, but they always do great versions of stuff. They'll say, like, here's the Japanese version versus this version versus the Criterion, those kind of things. And just to see the values of the black and white and some of those screen grabs, it's just like, wow, this, again, it's almost like 3 different movies when you see some of that. So the Lynch disc looked really good. There was a Japanese disc that looked really good. And then the Criterion, to me, looked a little darker than the others. Mm-hmm. So, and even on the Lynch disc itself, at the very beginning, it gives this whole explanation about how you need to reset your TV, and there's a quote-unquote hidden image that you need to adjust your brightness before you can see it, and then once you see it, then you're okay to watch the rest of the movie. It's like,
right.
Okay, thanks for looking out for us, David.
Which I used to do, but I don't do anymore because I can't handle trying to get stuff back to where it was.
Right? Yeah.
So I think I have it a little bit lighter than he suggests, but that'll have to do. Yeah, I do. I try to avoid too much of the comparison stuff. It starts to make my brain hurt after a while when I see, and I know that you're familiar with this, with movies from Dario Argento and having 10 different versions of things. And I used to try and track down the definitive one, and I've learned since then there really isn't a definitive version of a lot of movies, so I tend to avoid it now just because if something is better than what I have, I get frustrated, and if there's missing parts, I get frustrated. So
it's a good site for some of that screen grab type of stuff. I mean, they use a lot of charts and things where I'm just like, I don't really know what that necessarily means. I can judge by my eye, but that's about it. But I use that especially for the extra features, where it'll say what the extras are that are on the discs. Because otherwise, I mean, Amazon sucks for that stuff, and a lot of sites just absolutely suck for that. So show me what the comparison is. Why should I get the indicator disc over this disc versus the arrow versus the synapse versus the whoever? That is what I want to know. And of course, because I'm a greedy American, I want the most stuff.
Well, I don't know. Does the Criterion version have more? I know there's an extra interview on there. I think that has the Woody Woodpecker dolls in it or something. If my memory serves me, the Criterion Blu-ray for Eraserhead has the same amount of stuff as the David Lynch produced one. Yeah,
I think it's got a scotch more, because it does have those interviews that you're talking about, which are available on YouTube, I believe, and I watched that. It doesn't have that 79 interview, and as far as I know, that's not available on any of these discs or anything, which is, I think it's a very valuable thing to have. I would highly recommend that people check that out if they can. I've got it up here. So the Japanese one and Lynch's and the Criterion doesn't have the hour and a half stories, the Eraserhead stories. Oh, wait, no, I take it back. It's just listed as something different. They do have that.
I thought so.
Yeah, and then it's got...
and it has all the short films.
Has the short films, yep, and then it has the new and archival interviews with cast and crew. So it seems like that's got the most stuff. It doesn't have the 18-page booklet that came out with the original Lynch one, but so if you're not into paper, you're okay with that.
Yeah, and I think I'll keep my David Lynch one. I treasure that, and I do think it looks as good as the Criterion. Plus, I have the short films already on the same kind of format that they released at the same time. So,
yeah, no, I didn't feel the need to upgrade to the Criterion one this time around either.
I was kind of interested to know that this is sort of off the topic a little bit, that the Blockbuster that you worked with had both Eraserhead and Repulsion. Yeah,
we were pretty lucky when it came to that, and we weren't even the artsy store. I worked at 3 different Blockbusters over my tenure with them, and none of them were overly artsy. It was interesting to see the way that demographics would change the stock at the store. The first one I worked at was just outside of Ann Arbor, so we had the university there. So there were 3 different Blockbusters around Ann Arbor that I can remember, and each one of them had drastically different stock. And one of them, the one that I unfortunately didn't work at, was major art house kind of stuff being stocked there, which I found very unusual. But then with ours, I don't know what it was, but we had almost every single Pedro Almodovar film other than... we had Nasty Habits. We didn't have Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, because that was one of the ones that was forbidden from Blockbusters.
Right.
But otherwise, we had pretty much everything, which I found to be very strange. And Guy Madden films would come in. What was it? The Kingdom? Was that Von Trier all those years ago? I can't remember. Yeah, yes. So we would have some unusual art house stuff come in, and then plenty of exploitation. And the one that I ended up working at last, where I would give those recommendations, that had an interesting foreign selection, and then a couple cult films, but not a whole lot.
Yeah, we had to go to Tower Records to get stuff like that. I was wondering if, before you watched it, if you had kind of tried to guess what the title was in reference to.
With the little things behind Henry's head in that picture, I don't know why, but I always thought they were pencil shavings or eraser shavings. You know, like after you erase something, you have those little pieces. So I always pictured those as being that, or maybe it being like a nickname for him. I mean, it's funny. The same haircut comes up again in The Wraith, with the one with Charlie Sheen. And who is it? Clint Howard has almost the exact same hairdo in that one, which came out a few years later and definitely was an homage to Eraserhead. But they call him Rughead in that. So I don't know. Like we used to just call our friends just different weird names like Looney Bunhead or those kind of things. So it's just like Eraserhead made just as much sense. So yeah.
I always assumed before I took the chance to watch it that it was because of his hair, and it looked like a pencil on top of, or eraser on top of a pencil. And it's funny that you mentioned that about the background, because there is the scene where the pencil machine operator, dusts off the eraser bits and it floats up like that, but it's not the same scene. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, but there are definitely a lot of visual rhymes in there, seeing some of the same stuff repeated, or just things that will bring to mind other images from even within the same movie.
And of course, with Barton Fink, almost 15 years later with the same hairdo, I always thought that was kind of a definite nod to Eraserhead.
I can see that, and especially the whole idea of him being, quote unquote, trapped in that hotel room, and that being kind of, almost a gateway to hell for him. And even the way that the camera goes down into the sink is very similar to the way that the camera in Eraserhead goes into the radiator.
Speaking of the radiator, the end with the lady in the radiator and the flashing bright light, how do you see that end scene? Is it that he's just escaped in his fantasies again, or has he offed himself, or do you care?
I don't know if I necessarily care too much. I was always concerned about that foam that comes out of the baby, and that we see that sparking of the plug going on for his lamp, and I'm always afraid, like, what happens when that foamy stuff hits the open electrical outlet there? Is everyone in the whole room going to get shocked? So I was even watching for that yesterday. I was like, does that actually happen, or am I just adding those two things together in my head? I think I just add them together in my head. Yeah, for me, it's just basically he escapes and he makes it to heaven, or this heavenly place with this other woman. And the other woman, finally yesterday, it really struck me that she's got a real vibe going on of Marilyn Monroe. Like, without the big chipmunk cheeks, the Joe Shishido cheeks, she could look like Marilyn Monroe with the innocence in her eyes and the hair and the dress and everything. So, and I know that, again, going back to Twin Peaks, there's that line that Agent Cooper says, you know, like, if he could, he would want to know who killed JFK and who offed Marilyn Monroe. So it's like, yeah, I know that Lynch has a fascination with Monroe, so I wouldn't be surprised if she was kind of a stand-in there.
Yeah, wasn't he going to do a biopic of
I think he might be right, yeah.
I noticed on my last viewing that the beautiful woman across the hall had a very strong Dorothy Valens vibe going on.
Oh, yeah. She even has kind of an accent to her voice.
Mm-hmm. And the robe that she's wearing, I think, and then her hair, and it almost looks like that wig that Dorothy Valens wears is done up exactly like her hair. So it's interesting to see those blondes and brunettes play against each other in the different movies.
Yeah, and we'll, even get that with Mulholland Drive between Betty and Rita, again, with the good girl, quote unquote, and the bad girl.
Twin Peaks, too, as well, with the different, and Laura Palmer with the blonde hair not being the good girl, and the kind of inverse of that with Donna. And
even with Maddie, who is really much more of a pure person.
After reading your recommendation and then seeing it or hearing it in a couple different episodes of the podcast, I was just curious as to why you hadn't done an episode on it yet.
I've been making my way slowly through Lynch's stuff over the years. I was just thinking about this because I just released an episode on Psycho, and then I realized, I've actually done 5 Alfred Hitchcock films, and I think we've done, Dune was one of our first episodes. We've done Blue Velvet. We've done Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. We revisited Twin Peaks. I can't remember if we've done any other Lynch. We did Mulholland Drive as well.
Okay.
So it's like I'm kind of slowly making my way through his stuff. His stuff is such a fine wine that I just enjoy looking at these movies and talking about them. So yeah, I think eventually we might get to there. But more than anything, I kind of want to do Lost Highway now, and then maybe Wild at Heart. I'm almost working my way backwards through some of his stuff.
What about Elephant Man?
I love Elephant Man, and yeah, Elephant Man, I mean, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to that, but at the same time, I mean, I know that I said it was very natural for him to move from Eraserhead to Elephant Man, but there are elements of that feel like not necessarily director for hire, but it doesn't feel as Lynch as other things. It feels that's as straight of a movie as I think you'll ever get out of David Lynch, other than possibly the straight story itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the few kind of nightmare scenes are about it when you come to the imagery and stuff. But Elephant Man was the first that I saw. Little 11-year-old me, I don't know why it didn't traumatize me, but yeah, I loved it when it came out, and then saw Dune in the theater when it came out and loved it. And I was so happy to hear all the appreciation for that on your episode. It gets so lambasted. I think the tide is turning slowly on that. But I was not prepared for Eraserhead when I saw it. And Blue Velvet was another one where I couldn't make it all the way through. And it wasn't because I was bored or anything. It's just there is not that much context out there for Lynch's work.
Well, I would say with Blue Velvet, you might even want to look at stuff like the Douglas Sirk films, because there's a lot of that heavy melodrama going on. And then he just kind of takes that and turns it on its head, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, and I think at the time when I was 17 or 18, I probably hadn't seen any of those movies yet.
No. No, unless your mom or dad, probably your mom, are into those films, you're not about to see those anytime soon. And this was before Todd Haynes was kind of doing his Douglas Sirk melodramas and bringing some of that stuff to the fore. So if you'd seen now like Far From Heaven, and then you go back and watch Blue Velvet, you'll be like, oh, okay, now I kind of get what he's doing here with the overdone of it. You know, one of the things I found interesting, just kind of as a little aside, listening last night or watching the stories, the Eraserhead stories thing, and Lynch tells this story about I think it was Alan Splett and maybe his first cinematographer. One of them was very nearsighted to the point of being legally blind, and the other one was just about deaf.
Right.
And thinking of those two guys together, I don't know why, but I immediately thought of Double Ed from Blue Velvet. Mm-hmm. And just to have those two guys together, I know, the other brother isn't necessarily hard of hearing with that, but just to have those two guys together kind of complementing one another like Double Ed, the way that they're always walking together, I was like, well, there's another unusual thing that just transported itself into David Lynch's life.
Yeah, I think that was Herb Caldwell that was hard of hearing, and Alan Splett was legally blind. But it was those two, and then they had that wild drive, I guess, together. So
I love those stories on there. And oh my God, it sounds like you didn't watch the third season of Twin Peaks, but...
No, I did.
Oh, okay. So having Catherine Coulson in the documentary, quote unquote, but her there via the phone and all those shots of the phone, my heart was breaking because I was thinking of how Catherine Coulson passes in her last episode of Twin Peaks. And I couldn't get over it. I was just, like my heart was just crushed seeing that.
Yeah, that was rough watching her in those episodes. Was there anything that you wanted to add at the end?
I hope that people who have been listening to this conversation have watched the movie. Otherwise, we're going to sound like two raving lunatics. But no, it's always a pleasure to talk to another person who enjoys the film as much as I do.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mike, for being on the show. You will be the first official guest on Wake Up Heavy.
I am honored.
Well, just wait until the episode comes out before you say that. So. And I was going to ask if you had anything you wanted to plug for, say, mid-January.
So by the time this comes out, folks will be able to get their hands on some of the things that we're putting out in January, which include, we are doing a double feature, if all goes right, of Ernst Lubitsch films, talking about Trouble in Paradise and To Be or Not to Be. Well, talking about Mel Brooks' connection going on here with Elephant Man and now To Be or Not to Be remake. And then we will be coming up on our 400th episode, which is very exciting. And we'll be doing an episode about the Bruttles, All You Need Is Cash. So that should be a lot of fun.
And then when does the Ego Fest come out?
Ego Fest, by the time this comes out, that will have long been out there.
Okay.
That'll be out mid-December. So that and my year-end music mix and all that fun stuff will be out there then.
And one last thanks to Mike for agreeing to be on the show. And I couldn't think of a better first guest, actually. And I might throw up the full interview onto the new Patreon site, and more info will be available about that at a later time.
part 5.
So now we're into the meat of the movie, and that brings up a couple of things that came up in the interview with Mike and a few things that I've mentioned previously. And the start of this is the release of Eraserhead finally on DVD in the US. The rights had been held up by Ben Barenholtz, who acquired the rights very early on after it premiered at the LA FilmX, and he maintained the video rights for years. And once those came up, David Lynch bought them back and remastered the picture and sound for Eraserhead on his own, or under his guidance, I should say. It was, I think, supposed to come out in 2000. That's what the cool square box that it came in says. But it actually was released in 2002. I was a member of his website at the time, which he was very active on. He did all kinds of weird stuff on there. That's where Rabbits originated, which ended up being included in Inland Empire. And he did some animation, other funny videos with his son, Austin. We had a message board.
It's time for another tangent.
This is just a weird tangent to go off on. I joined, I don't remember how much it was, a month. I would see him on there every once in a while, and he always, Lynch always typed in all caps, which was kind of funny, since his character of Gordon Cole on Twin Peaks yelled all his lines since he was hard of hearing. But there was a guy on there who was constantly talking about a movie he was making. Oh, I got this movie coming up, blah, 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 just always on there. And a couple years later, I watched Cabin Fever for the first time with my wife. And I was like, oh shit, this is the movie that guy was talking about. And so that was Eli Roth. He was constantly on the David Lynch website message board spouting off about Cabin Fever, which is a movie that I actually like. And I like a number of Eli Roth's movies. He gets kind of punched down for a lot of the stuff he's put out, but I've enjoyed it, and he's a big promoter of horror, so I got nothing against the guy. I just thought that was a funny story. As Mike and I discussed, with the DVD came instructions on how to set up your screen to get the most maximum viewing pleasure out of Eraserhead, and so I did that when I first got the DVD, and I was so blown away by how amazing it looked, and it really clarified a lot of stuff that I missed in those old VHS days. And one of those shots happens at the very beginning of the movie, where we've got the man on the planet pulling on the levers, controlling whatever it is he's controlling, and there's a shot that kind of goes down into a hole, and I never really understood what that was, but it's a shack, the roof of a shack with a big hole in it, and apparently this is where the man on the planet lives. There was a shot in the movie of Henry looking out into an alleyway, and I could never quite make out what it was he was looking at. You could sort of see shadows and stuff, but this was part of a longer scene that got cut, which we'll talk about real shortly here. And it's just a couple of men fighting down in the alleyway, and this again goes back to his time in Philadelphia and all the violence that he witnessed there, which was unusual for him growing up in some, bucolic little towns for most of his life. Caused some confusion with the end credits that I'll get to as well, because when the movie was cut, it had been completely finished, shown at FilmX, and he just felt like it was too long and excised about 20 minutes. Well, the credits were done and they weren't changed. And so there's a lot of characters in there that don't show up in the film. And so that was kind of another unintentionally confusing thing for the first, I don't know how many times I watched it, but I would always think, well, who was that? Maybe it was just something that I couldn't make out. And then there was another weird shot of Henry encountering the beautiful woman across the hall at one point, and she has brought home a man, and I think this is after their liaison, in Henry's room, and he closes his door and peeks through the keyhole. And then there was a shot there that I could never make out what it was. And it's actually the POV of Henry looking through his keyhole, and then her door shuts and her doorknob basically fits perfectly in the frame of that keyhole. And it's no big deal. It's nothing. It's just something that I never, ever understood what was happening before. And thanks to this wonderful transfer that Lynch did, it finally became apparent what it was. One of the weird things that I missed, and this kind of starts my discussion on the things that make Eraserhead unnerving. When Henry's walking home at the beginning of the movie, and this is one of the few daytime scenes, he's walking through this kind of wasteland to get to his apartment, and he steps in a puddle. And when he gets home, he takes his shoes and socks off, and he dries the wet sock on his radiator. Now, it's the wrong sock, and this is just always, he steps in the puddle with his right foot, takes off the left sock or something like that, but God knows how long time had passed, or how much time had passed between those two shots. It could have been 4 years, so I can't really blame them for the continuity error on that. But then the camera does this panning shot of the underneath, or on the ground in front of the radiator. And there was all this stuff there, and I could never make out what it was. And I just thought, he does this every day, and that is hundreds of dried socks. And thought that, I think, until I saw it on I think even when I saw it in London, I still thought that. But it's just some weird organic material, and the same material shows up at the ex's house, and those are Mary's parents. And this is sort of a biggie, but at the finale of the movie, the baby's head grows gigantic. And when I used to watch this on video, I just thought it was more a trick of the camera, like it was the baby's head was just really close to the frame, and that explained the difference in size, and like it would go really close to the camera and then real far back and forth, and it was so dark and the lights were flashing, and that wasn't the case at all. I realized, I think there was a picture in one of the articles that I found online of Lynch and Nance next to the plaster head that they made, and I was like, oh, it got giant. It's not just floating around the room. Thank God for that remaster, and that old VHS can just piss off for all I care. I am not a VHS apologist. Movies should look fantastic, no matter how awful they are.
Part 6.
So let's get into the weird stuff. I think that the scene at Mary's parents' house might be one of the greatest examples of black comedy that I have ever seen. And the black comedy here is a bit flipped. When I think of black comedies, a lot of times my go-to example is Parents by Bob Balaban, where we've got this kid growing up in the 50s and his parents are cannibals. And so the grotesque is turned mundane in this 50s, TV Leave It to Beaver house. And in Eraserhead, it's the mundane that's turned grotesque. So it's just the, flip side of the same coin, I guess. Henry is notified by the beautiful woman across the hall that Mary has called and that he's invited to dinner at her parents'. And this is one of those instances of the banal fear that a lot of us face when we meet our prospective mate's parents. Like Mike said in the interview, it's just cranked up to the nth degree. It's that awkward kind of existential dread you feel about that situation. And this meeting with the parents goes about as horribly as anyone could possibly imagine. And it contains the first and numerous instances of this feeling of the familiar that is dissimilar. And I kind of liken it to passing through a strange town, and everything's just a little different than from where you live. Everybody speaks English. It's in America. Maybe it's even in your own state. But you stop at a restaurant and the food is just slightly different. Things are called different things. They sell RC Cola instead of Coke or Pepsi. Just real simple stuff like that, and it can kind of set you, on the back of your heels a little bit. This dinner, when Henry gets there, just the yard itself, it has these long growing vines for plants. They're like right on the edge of a factory of some sort. When Henry walks in, you hear this strange noise that goes on for a long time. And then here's a list of weird things that happens during this dinner. Mary has a seizure that her mom soothes by combing her hair. They have little chickens for dinner.
Strangest damn things. They're man-made. Little damn things. Smaller than my fist. But they're new.
That end up moving and spouting blood. The mom has an orgasm while this is happening and runs out of the room. There is a catatonic grandmother in the kitchen who helps toss the salad.
That's weird.
The father's arm has been hurt at some point, and he cannot carve the chickens because he has no feeling in his arm anymore. There is unexplained large black ductwork in the middle of the room. That noise that we heard earlier ends up being a nursing dog and her pups. The scene at Mary's parents' house, the X's, as they're called, it's almost, once I kind of forgot about all the weirdness and just sort of listened to the dialogue and what was happening in the situation, it kind of plays out like a soap opera. We've got the mom grilling the boyfriend about he and Mary having sex. She even comes on to him. For some reason in my head at some point it's like a telenovela. And I really wish that someone would film a straight version of that dinner scene without all the weirdness, just to see how kind of banal it all is. In this scene, we find out that not only is Mary pregnant, she's actually already had the baby. And Henry says,
That's impossible. It's only been...
They're still not sure it is a baby.
Which implies that not enough time has passed for her to have a baby already. And we have no idea what that time frame is. If he's saying impossible, it's way under 9 months. And of course, once we see the baby, we understand the implication of that. Henry, Mary, and the baby move into his tiny one-room apartment. We get a better sense of his decor, which includes the picture of the atomic explosion that was mentioned in the interview, the plants that he has, and this is, I think, the case also at the X's house. They're all just dead branches and sticks inserted into great big piles of dirt. And this is something that harkens back to his short film, The Grandmother. And I don't know where that idea comes from, but it runs in those two things. I don't know if we see examples of that later on in his film. I have seen a couple of paintings that have this same kind of thing in it. It might kind of be represented in Twin Peaks at some point. And that's about it. It's a very sparse room. He's got an old kind of Victrola record player where he plays Fats Waller tunes. And, I got so into the movie at one point that I really tried to track down those Fats Waller songs, and they're very hard to find. And then I also kind of became obsessed with those old lamps that they had, and trying to find one like for my room or for my studio apartments when I was out on my own. So that's how deeply Eraserhead got into my head.
Part 7.
So I am one of those people that is of the opinion that Eraserhead is a very autobiographical story for Lynch. The feeling of Philadelphia, it is his Philadelphia story. It is born out of his time there where he felt, I think, very scared and unsafe, as well as being thrown into a marriage and fatherhood kind of unexpectedly. He and his first wife, Peggy Lynch, she got pregnant, they got married, they had a child that had physical abnormalities, and if that doesn't parallel what happens in Eraserhead, I don't know what to say. The fact that, like Mike mentioned, he works at a printing factory when he's in Philly. Lynch doesn't even change the name of the factory. It's Lapel's factory, and that's where he worked. That fear, he kind of mentions this in a documentary called The Art Life, where that kind of, I think, put a hitch in what he felt the artist's life was, not being tied down to anything. The marriage didn't last through the production of the film. Jennifer Lynch has been quoted as saying, that is about me, that baby is me. It's kind of a horrible thought to have to go through for your life, but I mean, I'm sure as a creator herself, she understands that Lynch was using what, his experiences were. And even the idea of infidelity, this is probably something that ran through Lynch's head. It was the subject of the kind of failed AFI project that he had started called Garden Back, which is all about a man lusting after another woman and having that basically consume his life and his person. I think he ends up turning into a bug or something, or that lust turns into a creature itself and overwhelms him. Not that he was unfaithful to Peggy Lynch during their marriage. I have no idea about that, but that idea, it becomes something, and Lynch turns his ideas into things, whether it's in his paintings or in his movies. And that is true of Eraserhead and true of Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, most likely Lost Highway. Wild at Heart was based on a book, but he often talks about these kernels, these nuggets of ideas that branch off into his films. With Blue Velvet, we go further back into his childhood, but the impetus for that movie was, two separate ideas, one about spying on a woman and then, a mystery involving a murder. And he just smashed those ideas together and came up with Blue Velvet. And in Eraserhead, I think it was, that overwhelming fear of living in Philadelphia with all the violence, the decay around him. There, in that same documentary, there are pictures, I think, from a fellow student of Philadelphia at the time, and it looks kind of like how Detroit does these days. Just empty building, just an absolute wasteland. And it looks very much like the buildings and the area that Henry walks through in the opening scene of the movie. And then you get to the external weirdness, and I think this is where the ideas pop up and become concrete, and you've got the man and the planet, the sperm-like figures. They're almost a cross between like a fetus and a sperm, and the little tiny worm that he gets in the mail that ends up kind of coming to life, the lady in the radiator, all these external ideas that don't necessarily pertain to that nugget of the story of, fear of settling down. And so those are the things that I think people tend to focus on, and what leads to, I have no idea what this movie is about, and it's just weird for weird's sake, which I know I even accused him of being in certain aspects. And I think that that's, for this and Blue Velvet, that's kind of the stuff that ended up getting cut out. I think that later on in movies like Wild at Heart and Fire Walk With Me, he didn't trim that stuff as much. And that was why Wild at Heart was one of my least favorites of Lynch's. And I can just think of one scene. They're in a town called Big Tuna, and Jack Nance, who plays Henry in this movie and is in many of David Lynch's films, John Lurie and a couple other guys are all sitting around, and it's just strange dialogue. John Nance's character is talking about his dog, and it's just kind of that it doesn't really do a whole lot for the movie. It's just strange and Lynchian. I feel like he kind of lost control of that editor's eye, that feeling that he had at FilmX when he thought, oh no, this movie is too long. I'll cut out all the extraneous stuff that doesn't relate to the main story.
I think it's time for a break. Part 8.
And that is a good segue into the missing scenes. And we touched a little bit on this in the interview, but I first became aware of them, I think, in the Midnight Movies book that I mentioned. And then around the time that I joined the David Lynch website, I had, kind of gotten this renewed fervor for Eraserhead. I hadn't seen it in years because, no video stores had copies of it anymore. Our old Sunnyside video store was long gone. So after London, I probably rented it a few more times while we still lived in that part of town, and then probably didn't see it for a good 10 years, I'm guessing. Joining the website, finding out it was coming out, I did a lot of internet research at that time and found an article that really went into depth, for the first time for me at least, with those deleted scenes. And as Mike mentioned, Catherine Coulson, who is the log lady in Twin Peaks, for those of you that might not know, she performed kind of behind-the-scenes activity for Eraserhead, but she did shoot a scene where she and another gal are laying on a bed and slips tied up, and a man is going to apparently shock them with battery cables. And I think this is the scene that Lynch mentions in the Eraserhead stories that he has a little bit of, and I really wish they had put it in there. Then there's a scene where they go to the hospital and the same lady, Catherine Coulson, was to play a nurse and hand off the baby that wasn't shot. There is a scene of the exes visiting Henry and Mary at his apartment, which I am not sure if that was filmed or not. I think it was. And then this is a scene that I'd really like to see, and I've heard kind of two different varying stories for it. Henry is either looking for utensils so that he can eat, or I've read that he is looking for the little humidifier that he uses when the baby gets sick. And he opens a drawer, and apparently it was filled with vanilla pudding and a thin layer of frozen peas on top. And there is an image of that on this article that I printed off the internet years ago in like 1999 or 2000. That, to me, I think should have been left in because it fits with the story. He's looking for the vaporizer or the humidifier because it just suddenly shows up when the baby is sick. And then one other scene that the tail end of, like I mentioned, ends up in the movie is called by a lot of people the digging for dimes scene. And so it's this long, stretched out thing where Henry's looking. There's a commotion downstairs out in the alley. There's kids out there playing or something, and then they start digging, and they dig up all these dimes. Henry is running up and down, or going up and down the elevator. I don't know. It's a whole scenario, and this is where the baby is crying, and he can hear the crying all the way down the elevator shaft, and he's really frustrated and wants to go out and, I guess, dig for dimes. In his frustration, he kicks the furniture in the lobby, and the landlady comes out and says, "Don't kick my wood." That is the landlady who is in the credits at the end, but who got cut out of the movie. So that's one of the confusing things about the credits and the cut scenes and all that.
Part 9.
And the last thing that really can be, I think, disarming when watching the movie is the sound itself. And I don't know if there's a minute in the movie that doesn't contain background noise. And this was Alan Splett and David Lynch created all the sound effects. I think they pulled some wind sound from an old Ed Wood movie. That's what I've heard. But all these sounds in the movie, the baby crying, the factory noises, the train sounds, were all either created by them or manipulated by them to create this otherworldly noise. And it is constant through the movie. And a lot of the sounds, again, just like other motifs in Lynch's films, appear in other things. And one example is when Henry is on stage, and I never really thought about him being on trial. Mike mentioned that in the interview. That's an interesting thought. I have to kind of ponder that more. But in that scene, when the baby's head pops out of Henry's neck hole, it starts screaming, and there's this weird kind of double tracking during the scream where it sort of changes pitch, and it's like a different track laid on top of the first one. And I remember watching Twin Peaks when I finally got home from London. There's a scene with Bobby Briggs in the jail, and he is screaming at James Hurley, and Lynch does the exact same thing where it double tracks the sound effect there, and it's awesome. That kind of stuff is amazing. And of course, the factory sounds show up in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, electricity sounds. It's what you've been hearing in the background this whole episode. That is the sound of the movie. And it just goes on whether he's in his apartment or outside or at Mary's house. And those motifs, those repeated Lynch motifs, the lamps going out, just lamps in general in Dorothy Vallon's apartment. Although it's much nicer, it always kind of reminds me of Henry's tiny one-room apartment and the ex's house. I think Lynch, I know he did for Lost High was actually filmed at his home, but I think that he made a lot of the furniture that's in Dorothy Vallon's apartment. All very modern wood furniture. Even the little worm, when it comes to life and continues to get bigger and bigger, and then it finally opens its maw and the camera goes into it, it almost presages the worms in Dune, which is just a coincidence, but it's kind of interesting to see. And then electricity, that's been mentioned a number of times, the sparking of electrical sockets, or the burning out of lights, or the overexposure of lights, which happens in Eraserhead and Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, and Lost Highway as well, if I'm not mistaken. And Mulholland Drive has some of that kind of real thing, the lights getting really, really bright all of a sudden when the cowboy meets up with Justin Theroux at the ranch. Philadelphia is mentioned in a number of Lynch's works, and then that sound running through. And like Mike said, and I think this is the kind of the perfect phrasing, it's if you watch Eraserhead, it is a Rosetta Stone for much of Lynch's later work, and you can kind of go through and have an aha moment quite often, all the way up to the return of Twin Peaks. And actually there's a lot of Eraserhead stuff in that. And that whole 8th episode with the atomic explosion harkens back, obviously, to Eraserhead.
I think it's time for a break.
Well, if you've held out this long, hopefully you can hold out for a little while longer. I think this is going to be a tad bit longer than I expected. I don't want to rush through stuff. I like talking about Eraserhead. Every time I do one of these, I leave something out, and I think, oh man, I should have talked about that. And there is still going to be some stuff left out, but I want to talk about as much as I possibly can. And just thank your lucky stars that I didn't do one of my other ideas, which was to go through this scene by scene and have it be about a 5-episode series. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to talk about some of my favorite scenes, which doesn't exclude a whole lot from the movie. Some of it's already been touched on in the interview and just in passing remarks on other aspects of the film. I haven't talked about the dream sequence that basically gives the movie its name. It's sort of been alluded to a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit more about the baby, its creation, and then just its role in the movie itself. I'll get to the cast and crew later because a lot of them have ties with Lynch throughout both, all their careers. Oh, and a couple of my theories about the film. I will discuss a few things that I think of. I really try not to lay too much onto this film of my own. And I really think that people should watch it knowing that it's going to be weird, knowing that there's going to be things you don't understand. In this day and age, if you're familiar with Lynch at all, all the way up through The Return of Twin Peaks, you're going to know it's weird. And if that's not what you're into, then don't bother. Maybe this movie or this podcast will get someone who's never seen Eraserhead to watch it. A lot of times for me, when I listened to Projection Booth again today and their episode on Big Trouble in Little China. And you know what? Now I've got to go watch the movie again. I've seen it numerous times. And if that's what happens with this, great. So one of my favorite scenes in the movie involves Mary and Henry when they have all moved into the apartment and are taking care of their wonderful little baby. And I don't know how much time has passed. It's the first night I think that they have been shown all together in the apartment. They're trying to sleep and the baby is crying nonstop because it is storming outside. And Mary gets up to leave because she needs to get a decent night's sleep. So in the process, they have a little argument.
Why don't you just stay home?
I'll do what I want to do. And you better take real good care of things while I'm gone.
Mary turns to go to the door, and then she turns back around and reaches under the bed. And much like the dog nursing the pups in her house earlier in the movie, this is one of those scenes on the initial viewing and the first couple of viewing after that really threw me for a loop, really set that feeling of unease onto me. And she's pulling under the bed. She's kind of looking distressed and crying. And Henry's like, what in the hell is she doing? I'm thinking as an audience member, what is she doing? Is she going to collapse the bed? Is she trying to pull something out of there? I don't think we've seen Henry pull the fetus-like sperm figures out of the bed at this point. That happens when Mary returns. But it goes on for a while, and you've got this noise, and she's rocking the bed back and forth, and it's unsettling, and it's almost kind of sexual in a way, in a creepy way. And then at the end, she pulls out her suitcase. Again, it's that mundane, that banal thing. We've all done this. You store stuff under your bed and it fits when it goes in, but it doesn't want to come out. And it's just kind of the perfect encapsulation of the movie for me. Everything's familiar, but not how it is in this world. And that becomes disquieting in your mind. It's like that uncanny valley theory again. Nothing is quite right in this movie. It's out of time. There's really no way to... The black and white photography looks like an old black and white film. And they were using old stock. I don't think it was from the 40s or 50s or anything, but they in the Eraserhead stories discuss how they get on the Warner Brothers back lot. They get all this lighting equipment. They get film stock. They get sound stock. I don't know if it's all from Warner Brothers, but they acquire all this old stuff from these studios. They're probably using older cameras. I mean, it really looks like a movie made 20 or 30 years earlier. And then the way they dress and just the decor and everything puts it totally out of time. You have no idea where it's supposed to take place. Everyone assumes Philadelphia just because of how Lynch describes his time there. It's otherworldly. It's that uncanny valley throughout the whole movie. And then, of course, there is the dream sequence. And, of course, it's hard to delineate between dream and reality in this movie. It's all one horrible dream. But it's implied it's Henry, one of Henry's fantasies. He fantasizes about the lady in the radiator. The worm is probably a fantasy of his when it becomes animated or alive. The first time that my sister and I tried to watch this, we didn't even get to the dream sequence, the reason the movie is called Eraserhead. And so, again, still until I finally sat and watched it, I thought, oh, well, it's literal. The dream, he goes onto the stage where the lady in the radiator is. She appears and reappears a number of times. Henry goes behind this little stand. That's when the baby's head pops out of his neck, and his head is thrown onto the stage. This tree with, of course, no leaves, stuck in it's on a pile of dirt, but it has the same effect. It starts pouring out blood, much like the chickens did early on at the dinner scene. Henry's head falls through the puddle of blood and then falls out of the sky onto the street. And here is where we have other people. This is one of the few scenes other than the dinner at Mary's parents' house that includes other people. And so a kid picks up his head, takes it to this office, and they drill into Henry's head, extract that matter, put it into a machine, and that machine turns it into erasers that get applied to pencils. I think Mike mentioned the pencil machine operator dusts off the eraser shavings and it's backlit, and then we're back and Henry, is laying on the bed, and this was a fantasy of his. It's such a striking scene. It encapsulates so much of Lynch's work. It's that kind of Rosetta Stone idea again. You could find these images and sounds and experiences, all the way through to Twin Peaks: The Return. And then after that, Mary comes back. There's a great scene where all of a sudden she's back in bed and she's kind of wrestling with the covers. And there are some really great sound effects in this scene with the covers and then with Mary rubbing her eyeball. And at some point, Mary disappears and really never shows up again. Henry is frantically waiting for the lady, the beautiful girl across the hall. I discovered I've been saying it incorrectly. I want to call her a woman because she is a grown-up. And he is constantly checking to see her coming back to her apartment. He will hear the elevator check the hallway, and she shows up with another man. The baby laughs, and this leads to the evisceration of the baby. And I won't get too much into that, only to kind of segue into the baby itself. It's rumored that Lynch used either a skinned cat or a skinned lamb to create it. It does have a very organic look to it, but it is also manipulated and animated. It's an animatronic figure. The eyes roll, the mouth opens, the neck and head move. So it's very possible that he took the skin of an animal and built up inside of it for the movement and stuff. And of course, the body didn't really have to move. It's a little, kind of looks like a little pastry wrapped in a bandage. It's just a triangle laying on the bureau, the dresser. Much is said about the baby. I think it's just that fear of having a child, that wonderful moment where he takes the baby's temperature and it's normal, And then within an instant, he turns around. The baby has sores and is gasping for air.
Oh, you are sick.
There's a great moment when Mary is trying to feed the baby. Henry has come home, and the baby refuses to eat. And that, again, is one of those universal frustrations of parenthood, whether it's a deformed little baby or your adorable little 1-year-old. It's something that every parent struggles with. And if you haven't struggled with that, then thank your lucky stars. Eraserhead may be the best persuasive argument against premarital sex. Show this to your teens, or better yet, if you have an abstinence-only sex ed program at your school, throw a little footage at the front of this and they can play it as a sex education film.
Are you and your girlfriend thinking about having premarital sex? Well, before you decide, let's meet the Spencers, Henry and Mary. Henry and Mary hadn't known each other very long before they decided to have sex. They weren't even really sure if they liked each other, and now they have a horribly disfigured mutant baby to take care of. All this new responsibility is putting a great strain on their relationship. Let's take a peek at an average day in the life of the Spencers.
Part 10.
So on to the cast and crew, and the making of the movie, just in so much as the composition. It's one of Lynch's simplest films. Most of the shots are just locked down, static shots, but they're framed and composed so beautifully. So credit to Herb Caldwell and Frederick Elms. And just there's a little misconception that Herb Caldwell died during production, and that's why he was replaced by Frederick Elms. But that is not the case. He quit. He couldn't afford to do it anymore, basically. He had to, I think, move on to actual working jobs. And he died sometime later. Frederick Elms took over and finished up the movie. But I love that lockdown camera. There's a couple of funky edits throughout the movie. And I think that's, part of the stuff that they did more quickly, obviously, than the 5 years of shooting. But other than that, it's just a beautiful movie. The black and white is gorgeous. Now it is. Not on VHS. It wasn't. But it's something to look at. It's something to pick something out of the corner, like the little atomic explosion picture. You might not notice the first few times. It's just an amazingly constructed film. Frederick Elms would work with Lynch on a couple other movies. He worked on Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. And the same year, around the same time as Blue Velvet, he worked on a film called River's Edge, which was a favorite of mine back then, and another movie that starred Dennis Hopper. But a lot of the cast and crew either had or would go on to work in a lot of TV. And that's true for most of them other than Jack Nance, although he did work in TV and worked with Lynch the most. I don't know if there is someone who has been in more Lynch-directed films than Jack Nance. I'm sure I'm going in between John and Jack. He went by both. He was in Dune and Blue Velvet. He was, of course, in Twin Peaks and in the missing pieces scenes from Fire Walk with Me. He was in Wild at Heart, and then his last film role with Lynch was in Lost Highway. He died under mysterious circumstances, apparently got in a fight early one morning in the parking lot of a donut shop in Pasadena, I think, and then ended up dying from a subdural hematoma. He also was in one of my all-time favorite movies that isn't a Lynch film, Barfly. He was also in Meatballs 4, and the only reason I really mention that is that it was filmed around here. It was filmed up in Bass Lake, which is about 40 minutes away from here and in Madera County. And a friend of mine actually has a little non-speaking extra role in that movie. He's in a couple shots. That's with one of the Coreys. I can't remember which one. It's a piece of shit movie, but it has those connections for me. And then Charlotte Stewart, who plays Mary X, or Mary Spencer, I guess, after they are married. And they do get married. I think that's confusing, but they get married. That's part of the deal here. We just don't see that. And then she disappears, of course. But she, at the time, was on Little House on the Prairie. And I remember reading that way back then. And I used to watch that show when I was a kid, and I couldn't figure out who she was. But she was their school teacher. So she was kind of a regular, but not on every episode necessarily. And then she was in Twin Peaks. She was Mrs. Briggs, Bobby's mom. And she's been in a number of the Tremors films. And then she did return for Twin Peaks, the latest iteration, and I think she was probably also in some of those deleted scenes that ended up in the missing pieces. Alan Joseph, who plays Mr. X, worked in movies and TV. Notably for me, he has little parts in The Marathon Man and Raging Bull, two favorites of mine. Jeannie Bates plays Mrs. X. She had been acting for years and is in one of my all-time favorite Twilight Zone episodes, It's a Good Life, with the little shithead kid that turns people into jack-in-the-boxes. And then she's been in a couple of cheesy Z-grade horror movies, Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 4, and a werewolf movie called Mom, where she is a grandma and turns into... I tried to watch it and I couldn't make it all the way through. And then she returned to Lynchland in Mulholland Drive, and she is the old lady at the beginning of the movie when Naomi Watts flies into L.A., and then is one of the little people at the end of the movie when Naomi Watts blows her brains out. Judith Roberts plays the beautiful girl across the hall. Again, long career. She's continued acting, been in all kinds of stuff. She was in James Wan's first movie, Dead Silence, about a creepy puppet. She was had a regular part on Orange is the New Black, which my wife and I tried to watch and didn't stick with. And she's on a hilarious episode of The Mick that has since been canceled. And then recently she was in Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here, where she plays Joaquin Phoenix's mother. And then we've got Jack Fisk, who plays the man in the planet, but was also the production designer on the film. And that is what he does to this day in Hollywood. And I think he's directed a couple of films, but he was the production designer on the movie Badlands by Terrence Malick, which Sissy Spacek starred in, and where they met and they eventually got married. And this is kind of bringing me to a little tangent I wanted to hit on.
It's time for another tangent.
In the special thanks part of the credits in Eraserhead, Sissy Spacek's name appears. Before I really got any background info on the movie, I always thought that was strange. And I couldn't figure out, I'm like, what does she have to do with any of this? But, they got married, I think, in 1974, so production was still going on. Actually, probably had halted at that time. That's why Fisk was working on actual paying movies. She would help out. She, I think, ran the slate for a while, and she also helped out financially. She provided some money. She was getting considerable work at the time in the mid-70s. And of course, with Carrie coming out in 1976, so that was all happening during the making of Eraserhead. They have been married since then, have 2 daughters, and Fisk has worked on a couple of Lynch's films, as well as just tons of other. He worked on Terrence Malick films, and he worked on The Straight Story, and I think Mulholland Drive for Lynch. But one of the movies that I have discussed, The Messiah of Evil, he did the production design for, and as well as Carrie, and I think maybe 1 or 2 other De Palma movies. And he and Lynch actually had known each other since the mid-60s, when they were both in their early 20s. Lynch kind of followed him to the art school in Philadelphia, and then Fisk and Alan Splett kind of followed Lynch from Philadelphia to LA and the AFI. So they all knew each other before that. And I just found out the other day that Fisk was in 2 super early, mid-60s, short, like 1 to 2 minute long films that David Lynch did. They are trippy, and Peggy Lynch is in one of them. So it's Fisk and Lynch's first wife, Peggy. And then the bit players in the dream sequence are actually all actors as well, working actors. I always found this kind of odd. I always thought that they just kind of existed in this movie other than Jack Nance and Charlotte Stewart. You know, I never really recalled seeing any of these people, but Darwin Jostin plays Paul, who has some of the funnier scenes in Eraserhead. He was in a couple of John Carpenter movies. He was in Assault on Precinct 13 and The Fog. And then he worked as a crew member on Wild at Heart for Lynch. And then the pencil machine operator is Hal Landon Jr. Eraserhead was actually his first role. He went on to work in TV a lot. He was in the 80s revival of The Twilight Zone. And then he was in both Bill and Ted's movies. And he plays the dad of either Bill or Ted. And I really don't remember who. I've seen the first Bill and Ted movie. I never saw the sequel. Hey, maybe he'll be in the new one if he isn't already dead. So we'll see. And then the boss of the pencil machine factory was in Sometimes They Come Back, which is a Stephen King adaptation. And the little boy who finds Henry's head out in the alleyway was played by Catherine Coulson's nephew, Thomas Coulson. And the lady in the radiator is one of the few non-actors in the movie. She was actually a singer named Laurel Neer, and she and her siblings had, I think, kind of a folk group in the 70s, and her siblings are actually both actors. They haven't done a whole lot of work, but I think this was somebody that Catherine Coulson knew. She brought in a lot of people to work on the film.
I think it's time for a break.
Okay, so my theories. And I, for a long time, tried to crack the code of Eraserhead, and then I gave up and realized, this only David Lynch knows what any of this means. And he has stated over the years that nobody's interpretation has fit his own, other than the, being pulled from his personal life. Really didn't see too much in the way of theories that I agreed with. But I'm sort of coming back around on one, and the world of Eraserhead is often called post-apocalyptic.
That doesn't sound right.
Post-apocalyptic. I kind of poo-pooed that for a long time. Even before the interview with Mike, I kind of had started to rethink that. And then when he brought up the scars on the man from the planet, and then I started thinking about the lady in the radiator and the way she looks, and the baby, and of course the picture of the atomic explosion, I'm almost ready to buy it. This is the world that's left after the atomic bomb goes off. And it's so, it's not biker gangs fighting prehistoric creatures and stuff like that. Sorry. And it's this mundane world where things are just horrific. So I don't know. I could easily just discard that whole thought. And then the other thing I was thinking was that it kind of plays out like a Greek tragedy or a Shakespearean tragedy. And there is a theory out there that it's based on Hamlet, or it's kind of a retelling of Hamlet. And you can buy this guy's ebook on Amazon or whatever. And I didn't bother because I thought that sounded ridiculous. And part of the reason that he claims this is because in the Eraserhead stories, Lynch mentions the hamburger Hamlet a number of times as some place that he went to eat. And I think that's kind of a stretch, but we've got Mary's parents kind of being like gods, where she's forcing the marriage on them, and the mom, of course, is trying to seduce him, which happens all the time in Greek plays. The killing of the baby is kind of the reverse Oedipus complex, kind of, where he is only free once he does this. And when he does it, it causes everything to collapse. The man and the planet can't control anything anymore, and he finally disappears in the arms of the lady in the radiator. So I don't know. I think it's a stretch too, but it just sort of plays out that way to me within the infanticide, and Lynch is hesitant to offer up his own theories, and that's because he wants everyone to take away what they get out of it. So ignore everything that I've just said. I do have a theory about the opening of the movie, though, that I kind of like, and a lot of people see that as the conception of the baby. We open with Henry's head floating in space sideways, and then we go into the shack, and the man on the planet starts pulling levers. This makes Henry open his mouth. It makes one of the spermy fetus guys come out of his mouth, and it gets tossed into a puddle of water. So this is, quote-unquote, the conception scene. But I always thought of it as the creation of the world of Eraserhead itself. This is kind of the literal opening of the movie. It's the creation of the world. It's timeless and placeless. And the movie then ends with the evisceration and death of the baby. The man on the planet loses control, and Henry ends the world in a glowing ball of light with the lady in the radiator. And that's it. I cannot say the word radiator. I say it too fast. That is like the 10th time I've messed up on that word in this. So that's my take on the opening, and the fact that this is such an insular, isolated, strange world that it is created at one point and then ends, and nothing else exists but that, and in the world of Eraserhead. Okay, I think I have finally reached the finish line. I'm going to end with another special little interview and then play out with a song. If you in fact made it to the end, thank you so much for listening, and thank you for listening to this season of Wake Up Heavy. I have no idea when I'll be back and what movie I'll be talking about. Probably do a couple short things before the next full episode, and I am tinkering with the idea of doing Suspiria, but we shall see. Okay, this is Mark saying goodbye finally, and don't forget to wake up heavy. So, do you remember seeing parts of Eraserhead that one time?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember what parts it was?
The lady in the, what was it?
Radiator.
Yes, her dancing and singing, which was horrifying. And the little kid, the little alien child. I only remember seeing it because I've walked out at different points of when you were watching it, but I do remember you showed me that scene.
Okay. And what did you think?
It was strange. It was very strange.
Yeah, that's a good word. Do you think it's something that you will watch someday?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah? You'll watch it with me?
Yes.
And get freaked out?
No.
No?
Because it's not that weird.
Well, you haven't seen the whole thing yet.
Dang it.
So what did you think about that baby head popping out?
Well, I never saw that. I didn't see that.
Oh.
I only saw the kid at certain points. I would see it walking. I would see it walking around, and that's it.
The kid walking around?
Well, I don't know. I can't remember it clearly. The only really part that I could remember is her singing and in the radiator. It was weird. It was so weird.
Okay. Yeah, there wasn't a kid walking around. There's the baby that's wrapped up. That's okay. So when you watch the whole thing, maybe we'll come back and talk about it some more. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Cleo.
Goodbye.
Got your good things, and I've got
me.